And do you want to kick it off, Jasmine, about who you are, what you're working on right now?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jasmine Aguiar. I'm the president of the working group. We are a license management firm out of LA, and we currently oversee 12 licenses in the state of California. All of them are in very different stages of licensing. Some have reached the annual provisional stages, where others are still at the municipal level. Also, I am a social equity applicant for the city of LA, and I was awarded 2 licenses in phase 2. One was for distribution, and the other one is for transport. I did ask the city to allow me to divide those 2 licenses because I grew up in a family-owned business in the city of LA, and we did retail, small grocery stores. Then my family transitioned into commercial real estate and commercial transportation, which is why I chose to go the transport route. And based on how the state of California has rolled out transportation and distribution licenses, we've been able to really niche market the transport side of the cannabis industry, not really focusing on distribution to retail stores, more of transport of products between licenses for bulk further processing. I'm also a board member of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. The Minority Cannabis Business Association is a national trade organization with a focus on policy development at a municipal, state, and federal level with a social equity lens. We've drafted social equity municipal ordinance, which is being rolled out in various cities within the state of California. Our model state bill has been co-signed by the state of California. However, it hasn't been adopted, which is very interesting because of the landscape that we have. And our federal work is still work in progress given like the limitations that we have, but it is a really good organization, and it gave me a way to segment the advocacy work that I was doing because as a social equity applicant, I was always segmented into that category and didn't really have the bandwidth that I needed at a city level to have a strong voice. MCBA allowed me to have that national backing and come into city council with my chest out and say, hey, listen, we already wrote this out. All we have to do now is implement it. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, so my name is Whitney Beatty, and I came to the cannabis space in an untraditional route. I actually grew up in Detroit in the 80s, and Nancy Reagan told me to say no to drugs, so I did. I did not have experience with cannabis in high school or really in college. I came out here, got my master's degree in film. I was working in the entertainment industry, and that's a little bit stressful. And I found myself sitting at my desk one day, and my heart started racing, and I started sweating, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And I got into my car, and I drove to UCLA Medical Center, and I parked my car where the ambulances are and left the keys in there, because if I'm dying, do I really care if my car gets stolen? I don't think so. And so I went in and I told them I was having a heart attack, and they said, no, you're having an anxiety attack. And that changed my life, because that diagnosis of anxiety meant that they put me on a lot of medications, which I realized I did not like. And an offhand comment, a doctor said to me, well, why don't you try cannabis? And I was like, what are you saying? You know, but what it did is it made me do my research. I learned about the plant, I learned about the medicinal benefits, and I also did a deep dive as to why I felt the way that I did about the plant previously. You know, and from everything from the war on drugs to Harry Anslinger and the reason why we have prohibition in the first place. And it really attracted me to the industry and to the space and to the opportunities there, and I started a company called Apothecary. We do high-end storage for cannabis consumers. The easiest way to explain that is If you keep your wine in a wine fridge, you keep liquor in a bar, you keep cigars in humidors, but most people keep high-end cannabis in a shoebox under their beds. And that did not make sense to me. So I sell beautiful locking humidity storage for cannabis. And also as stepping into this space, I thought that it's equally important for me to advocate for other people who are coming in behind me, especially women and women of color. And so I'm a board member for Supernova Women. We work hard to encourage women of color to come into this area and be stakeholders in this space. We love to see people coming in as business owners. I'm also a Los Angeles social equity applicant for Phase 3, Round 1 dispensary license. So I've got a little bit of everything going on.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Lassner, Director of Community Affairs at EASE. Also didn't go a normal route to cannabis. I liked cannabis as much as the next college student, but it wasn't necessarily a life passion. I came through it through politics. I did a bunch of campaigns, ended up working for the mayor of DC, and then really my trajectory, my theme of my career has been around community affairs or community building, community organizing, and then went to Lyft and started their community affairs program, and was looking at sort of what is the next interesting political landscape in California, and it was really around cannabis. And so got involved with EASE and started their community affairs program, and really have been working within communities that we already are in, already are in, and ones that we're looking to go to understand the issues in those communities and understand questions or concerns that people have, and make sure that they have a point of contact within our organization to understand what we do. And EASE, I can give you a little quick synopsis of what we are, is we are a software platform. We work with dispensaries they can plug into our software and then distribute cannabis to consumers and patients, and get sort of all the back end work. So our community affairs team really works within these communities to make sure that people understand what we do, but we also are there to listen to their concerns and help address them and help them advocate for themselves, people in those communities.
All right, and we've got Lori, perfect timing. Yeah. We are going down the panel of introducing ourselves and our background and something exciting that we're working on right now.
Good morning, everybody, and I apologize for my tardiness. It's bad when the Uber driver said this is unusual traffic for LA, and I'm like, wow. So anyway, thank you for having me. So I'm Lori Ajax. I'm the chief of the Bureau of Cannabis Control, and my story is fairly simple. I started in this role just about 3.5 years ago. The state was tasked with setting up the state regulatory system for both. Well, at first it was just medicinal, and then adult use got added on when Prop 64 passed. So that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years, is establishing the requirements, the regulations for our licensees. And then on January 1st, we started issuing the first temporary licenses. We are in almost 2 years of implementation, and there's no more temporary licenses, by the way. So we have everybody in provisionals and annual licenses. The Bureau specifically, we regulate the latter half of the supply chain. You've got Food and Ag that regulate the cultivators, Public Health that regulate the manufacturers, and the Bureau regulates the distributors, the testing laboratories, the micro businesses, and the retail licensees, and those special cannabis events that we're starting to see more of around the state. So that's what we've been busy, making sure getting people licensed, and of course we're also in charge of overseeing enforcement of our licensees, and also working with our sworn law enforcement partner at Department of Consumer Affairs on the unlicensed market.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining. And, I think we're 2 years into cannabis regulation. A lot of us have been in this industry for a lot longer. And a lot of the times we think of success as just like this 45-degree angle of like, yes, I'm just going to make my way there and it's going to be great. But what we've learned in the cannabis industry, that it's not that way. It's not even like the iceberg analogy. It's just like all of this movement and changing and being able to pivot. And so when you all think about these last 2 years, or even your time in the cannabis space, what kind of strategic insight have you been able to gather and that you could provide with our audience? Jasmine, do you want to start?
I think one of the things that have benefited myself is I had experience in the state of Colorado. So that allowed me to go through a transitional period into a legal market already. I've already been through this. I've seen the struggles of transitioning into that market from a ancillary service perspective, consulting as a community, right? Because there really wasn't education to our community as well. So one of the things that I always like to share is be frugal through your process. There is no need for you to have to spend millions of dollars on building out any business. You are a small business. Like any other small business in any other industry, you're going to have startup struggles. Those startup struggles come with unsteady regulation that continuously challenges you every single day. And your assets, your resources are spread out very thinly. Growing up in a family-owned business ethic, we did not expand if we did not have the revenue to do it. I just have that embedded in me. So we haven't done an expansive expansion within our cannabis businesses because we don't have the resources or the money to do it. And raising capital has been very expensive. And what I mean by that is that because of, and I'm gonna put myself in the social equity shoes right now versus a non-social equity applicant, the other licenses, the 10 licenses that our firm oversees, don't have the same problems with raising capital that I do individually as a person, as a social equity applicant, because of the perception that's out there. Investors automatically think that they deserve 49% or sometimes 67% of my business because I'm a social equity applicant. That's very different to my Northern California licenses who were able to raise millions of dollars for minimal equity. So one of those challenges has been staying afloat using minimal money, right? And another thing that has really helped is staying within that small operating budget allows you to stay consistent with changes in the industry. There's losses that are still being had as you conduct transactions because this is new to everyone. Banking is still an issue, so that cash flow is not always available. So you might have millions of dollars in investment, but that doesn't mean it's liquid money that you can use. So operating within the mindset of being frugal allows you to use your resources that are at hand and be creative with those resources as you try to conduct business throughout the industry.
Excellent. And everyone else, what are your thoughts just on over these last few years in the cannabis space, just how it's played out and your thoughts on, any strategic insight you could provide?
I think that over the last 2-3 years, the thing that I learned most and really stuck with me is the ability to pivot. I think that becomes utterly important in an industry like this that is moving as quickly as we are. And that goes on both sides of the coin. For the government to be able to make changes when they see things that are not working. A good example of that is the work that's being done right now in Oakland in order to lower taxes to make businesses more sustainable for the people up there. We need to be able to make changes in order to make this system actually work. And on the other side, for businesses, a lot of us who were here before legalization have gone through a hell of a 2 years. I've seen so many great operators and great business people end up out of business because of, overregulation and problems with compliance and not being able to stay in this industry. And so I think it's important that as a CEO and as a business owner in this space that we're ready to pivot. We're ready to keep our eyes constantly on where the market is going, how the market is changing, and making sure that we are constantly reevaluating the business opportunities that we have in front of us. We cannot, in this market, sit on your hands and just drive straight out into nowhere because you'll end up alone. So I think that pivoting is the key.
Yeah. I think California was such a unique environment. Coming in and trying to regulate it was a challenge I can't even imagine that Lori and her team had to do. 20 years of a medical market, decades-long legacy industry. So there was no model, and even though there was Colorado and Washington, it wasn't the same as here. And so I think with such a big market, bringing people together to align on priorities and strategically think about how to accomplish goals has been somewhat of a challenge, but one I think we're sort of getting to a good place where people are sort of coming together in this industry, big players and small players. We see coalitions, VapeGate, for instance, which is, the potential of regulations that could come down against vaporizers that has the industry very concerned right now. We see this happening in Massachusetts and some other states, and I think that people are really coming together in this industry, whether they have other priorities or whatever, but this is such a big issue. And so LCCS is a group that we just joined at EASE, which is legal cannabis for consumer safety, that is going to be working on hopefully setting up real good regulations that will allow for safe vaporizers that are legal while making sure that the illegal ones that are causing damage and harm are not in the system. And then there's also Californians for Equal Access, which is another coalition of folks that have come together to make sure that people in California have legal access to safe products, and so they aren't going to the legal market. And so I think that we're starting to see sort of a unifying of priorities and really focusing on some of these big issues at hand.
Yeah, I think government is similar to some of what you're going through, probably maybe in a different way, but we have struggled too for the last 2 years, really trying to make sure, it's like anything in small business, if something doesn't work, you fix it, and the same with government, and trying to move fast enough for the industry, because we too, if something's not work, it doesn't make sense to continue it, and I think we are already looking at our regulations and being strategic on what needs to be changed now and what we should be working on. Of course, the priority changes constantly, as these ladies have said, but it's the same. When we hire, we probably have we're continuing trying to hire good people, and we are looking for people that are there to help the industry, that are enthusiastic. But one of the things I tell perspective, and by the way, we do second interviews with everybody. They all go through a first round, and then they come with our interview with me, and I always say, if you're here and you just want to come in and here's your inbox and you just finish that inbox and the priority never changes, this is the wrong position for you, because every day the priority may change. We may have you working on this, and we're going to have you pivot. So I loved what you said about being nimble, being pivot. The same with government. We've got to do that. I think we've just got to learn to do it maybe more quickly. Right? Is that what you're saying? And we have our own struggles, and I'm just going to tell you, it's perseverance. Even at the government level, it's perseverance. I always feel that being a good leader is always asking questions, and I figure whether you're in the cannabis industry and you're trying to make it, ask questions, don't listen to rumors, educate, and I think it's important for the education is on all parts of the supply chain, because if you're a retailer, it's important to know what your distributor's doing and how they're setting up their contracts and how they're dealing with the laboratory. And I think just there's a lot of education that I still think needs to go on, and I think there's a lot of folks out there that just want to scare everybody, and I always say, ask the question. We want to hear from you. We want to hear, I'd love to hear, I'm happy to hear the good, but I also want to hear what's not working, and I think as long as we continue as the government and we engage you in having that dialogue with us, I think that formula worked from the beginning, and we have to continue even when people are hurting. That's not when you shut down the conversation with the government. Even if you don't agree with us, don't shut down that conversation, because that's important to keep that going, to make the changes that need to be made.
Excellent. Perseverance, being nimble, frugal, adjusting in community. I like it. So what about challenges? You know, I think that any leader faces a huge amount of challenge, whether it's fundraising for a business or trying to kind of navigate where they're going next. And Whitney and I were talking about your fundraising, and I'd like you to kick off the question of what's the biggest challenge that you've faced in the cannabis space, and what have you been doing to overcome it?
The biggest challenge by far has been fundraising, by far. And it's extremely stressful in general. It's hard to raise money as an entrepreneur, full stop. But when you add other things on, like being a female and being a minority, it becomes even more difficult. If you look at the numbers, they're very clear. VC dollars, about 2% of those are going to women, and about 0.0006% are going to female founders of color, which makes it extremely hard to raise money. And this stage of the game, it's paramount that entrepreneurs are able to bring cash into their businesses, because we're seeing more money flooding into the space than ever before. And I think that, it also speaks to the idea that, we used to be an industry that was 38% was female-led businesses, and that number continues to plummet. And one of those reasons is because we're not finding that cash in order to be able to compete with other people. As these male-led businesses, end up raising $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, my business, who's raised $250,000, cannot compete with that. And so what do? I fundraise anyway. That's what I do. I go out there and I beat on all the doors. I was able to raise a seed round for my company that was a mix of, I went through a business accelerator, the Cannabis Business Accelerator. I raised at the ArcView Group. I won their Quick Pitch Prize in 2015 and won $50,000 from them. I've raised money from, small family funds. I've raised money from angel investors. And I think that the difficulties come on a couple different sides. It'll be easy for me to say that it's, all race-based, but I don't think that that's necessarily it. I think that issues come from the fact that when you don't have high net worth people in your network, it becomes hard to find who to pitch. Who do I talk to? Who can I even go to be able to raise that money from? My friends and family round was my family, but my family did not have, $10,000, $20,000 to give me. My family had $500 and $1,000 and $5,000, and still to this day, that money is the heaviest on my head, because I know that money was given out of what they did not have. And so that becomes important, to me. So it's being able to build those relationships and also understand what this process is as people are coming into this space. A lot of people haven't raised money, so being able to understand what's required in a pitch deck, what kind of KPIs are people looking for, making sure that you're raising money at the right time in your business. If you just have a logo and a dream, maybe now's not the best time to sit down with an angel investor. And being able to talk to them at the right time. And I also think that a lot of it becomes, angel investors in particular, who are most likely to invest in in entrepreneurs like me at this stage, tend to be older white men. And they tend to invest in people that remind them of themselves. And few of them see themselves as a 40-year-old single mother who's black. I don't know why. But I have to work harder to make sure that they understand that that I have the drive, that I have an opportunity for them, that I'm not here begging for anything. I'm giving you an opportunity to stand up with me in this business, that I already quit my job, sold my house, and put everything on the line in order to build this business. This is an opportunity, and if you're not going to take it, the next one will. And that's kind of the attitude you have to, come at this with. It's really important that you have that confidence, that you have those numbers, that you've done your due diligence, so you can stand up in the room with, whoever is in front of you, and explain why, you deserve that cash.
Excellent. Any other challenges you ladies would like to share?
I think there's a ton of challenges. Banking is obviously a huge one still, that this is still a federally illegal product is a huge one. And I would say that, going back to sort of my point earlier, is that getting people together as a community organizer, obviously that's always what I think about, is how do we pick these things that are extremely hard, fundraising, banking, and get people together to focus on these issues so we can change them. And I think that there is a tremendous amount of issues, both federally and locally, that we need to do that for.
I think for us, really, we're looking at how can we issue more licenses to have more businesses across the state, not having these big areas that don't have cannabis regulation. So I think the local issue has been an issue for us because we can't issue a license if the local jurisdiction does not approve of the business or the license being there. And I think really working on that front, and we talk about it a lot, but this is one thing where we could, I think, where the industry and the state aligns. How do we get good information out to the local jurisdictions? How do we make sure that they're listening to us, not necessarily, because I think there's a lot of fear from the part of locals because they're hearing from other people that maybe have other interests, but they may not have we live cannabis 24/7 whether and I find that sometimes we think everybody understands the issues like we do, and they just don't, because you got to realize the locals are dealing with other issues too, with whether it's housing issues, homelessness, and so it's how do you get in front of them and make this a priority for them, because I really feel that we do need more jurisdictions to open up so we can issue those licenses. And of course, I think that just opens up the challenge of the unlicensed activities that are happening in a lot of these banned areas. And, I feel like we start to make progress on that front of going after, you see a lot, we're serving a lot of search warrants, all of that, but when these businesses just can open up the next day after you put all that work, it can be deflating. It's like fundraising and getting rejected. It's like, I can't even imagine what it would be to they ought to make the state fundraise for us. Can you imagine that? Boy, that would be a challenge. So I would say those are probably, and those issues almost go hand in hand. I mean, I think we could all give a laundry list of all the challenges, but I think it's how you handle those challenges. I've had to learn that you can't take everything on at once. You've really got to prioritize, and I'm really thinking for the Bureau, what can we do short term that's going to make our licensed population more successful, and then what can we do long term, and how do we again, I'm going to say, how do we work together with you, because again, when you're dealing with the state, what's good for LA isn't necessarily good for Sacramento, and how do we work on that prioritizing those issues with the industry and saying, hey, maybe this can wait, but these three things need to happen fairly soon, and we concentrate our resources there.
Jasmine, did you want to add anything?
Ditto.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk about women leadership. So I think it was in 2015, there were more women leaders than any other industry in the United States, right? So I think it made up about 38% of C-level executives were women. And that number has declined. Then it's risen a little bit and it's declined. And so I want to talk about I kind of want to open the discussion up for equitable roles for women and equitable pay. So Sarah, if you want to kick it off, what are your thoughts on ways that organizations can sponsor and have that dialogue with, what is true equitable pay? How can we elevate women in the workplace?
Yeah. I think it's going to be a little bit cliche, but I think honestly, sponsoring networking events is something that we take very seriously. And I 2 years ago, if you would have said that to me, I would have rolled my eyes that those networking is helpful. But honestly, I've seen it so much in this industry really make some really amazing progress. I've seen women brands get connected with women investors. I've seen people who are struggling to get through the regulatory process meet the right person that can help them. And so I honestly think that sponsoring those kinds of events where women can get together and really meet each other and help each other is such an important thing. We do it at Ease as much as we can, and LA has a ton of these events. Cannabis, we've also sponsored She Can and Females to the Front, and all of these events are just such an amazing opportunity. So as an individual, you should go. As an organization, you should sponsor those events. And then beyond that, I think also putting your money where your mouth is, not just in sponsorships, but also investing in women. We just, yesterday, actually, we launched an accelerator program for social equity licensees. Actually, a huge number, I think it's 70-ish% of them were women-owned businesses. And so we, along with investor partners, are giving out $50,000 grants to 10 of these licensees, and then they're going through a mentorship and training program and help fundraising program. And so organizations and businesses should do more of those kinds of events as well.
And when I mean sponsor, I don't necessarily mean dollars. I'm just curious because it is, I mean, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a lot of ways for mentorship. You have to kind of create your own mentorship. But I am curious if you guys have any other insight, if you ladies have any other insight on other ways that we can help elevate, either if it's an entrepreneur or woman, or if it's somebody in an organization that, let's say is an entry-level position, like what other things can people in the cannabis space be doing?
I definitely encourage everyone to reach out to Women Grow. I started with Women Grow in 2014. I was our first employee. And I was doing consulting work in Colorado, and I was able to bridge that gap between what the community in Colorado needed and use that curriculum in Spanish. So it took a lot of work from my end to be able to translate and do the outreach work through the organization. And back in 2014, the interest was tremendous, and it was more than what we could handle as an organization, and it grew out of control fairly quickly. The company has gone through a lot of changes since then, and there is still some chapters that haven't been able to get back and running because regulation in those certain areas didn't really support a chapter for women there, right? And there was a lot of backlash. So, however, there's still a presence, and the LA chapter has recently come back. It's based out of the downtown LA area. However, Women Grow is a national organization, and it has roots in various cities across the United States. It has a massive network. Social media is a great place for women to reach out to other women. I constantly do it. That's how I met 420 Attorneys, was through social media. Really just reaching out and saying hello to people. I think also being intentional with that reach out, because there are women that are very busy in the industry, and we do want to connect, we do want to empower, but our resources and time are very limited. So be intentional with that communication so you both get what you want out of that relationship.
All right, next question or anything else? Okay, I think we're good. All right, we've talked a lot about social equity, and so there's a few more questions that we have, and we've got about 15 minutes. So maybe we can do some speed round in some of this stuff, because I want to get to some of the meat. But when we think about social equity, it seems like it's really pioneered in California, or at least the concept of it has been. And so what is social equity to all of you, if you could define that, and what can we do to also elevate social equity? Instead of just like, oh, it's a social equity licensing, like what does it truly mean?
I mean, I think that the concept of social equity is the idea that, communities of color have been disproportionately disenfranchised by a war on drugs, and in legalization deserve prioritization in regards to licensing. That, is I think what the concept. The reality becomes much different, much different. So I'm a huge supporter of social equity in general. I think it's very important that we're having these conversations before legalization across the country. I think that one of the issues is that how it's implemented in every city and every state becomes very different. As somebody who is a phase 3, round 1 person who is on a map in limbo right now, as MedMen enjoys their year 3, I think it's important that that prioritization moves forward forward, and that we are able to process licenses across the board. I mean, not just 100, but there are a lot of people in line and in queue and who have been waiting. And I think that that becomes really important. I think the other side of that is that there's this idea that social equity means black and brown. And I don't know that that is the case. That's not legally the case. You know, we're not, these licenses are not going to black and brown people. These are all decided on zip codes. And so there's all, you know, as a business owner on the ancillary side, you know, I've had people say, oh, you're social equity business. Well, on the ancillary side, I'm just a black business owner. You know, that's not social equity. It's the idea that we all deserve to be here across the board. And I think also, I think when we're talking social equity, we need to talk about what we're doing for the communities that were disproportionately disenfranchised. The people who don't want to own licenses. My grandmother doesn't want a license. She wants her community helped. She wants, you know, those resources back into those streets. You know, for me as a dispensary owner, I want to be able to, you know, talk to people of color, especially the older generation, who is hugely afraid of cannabis because of what happened in our communities from the war on drugs. And I think that those are the things that we need to think about and talk about.
I think to piggyback on that, it's really a community program, right? Not everyone that checks off a box should be operating a cannabis business if you are not an entrepreneur. It's very difficult to operate. However, that opens up an arena for predatory practices that investors who aren't able, because the social equity program is now a stipulation for you to own a license, you have to have a social equity applicant. Let me go find someone that just checks off this box. And that's not the intent of the program. In the city of Los Angeles, we have diversity and we have interest. There was about 800 licenses that were submitted in phase 3 for retail licenses. Only 100 will be issued. What happens to all that other interest that's there? Some of people that are entrepreneurs that should be operating in the industry are left in the sidelines because of other people that just check off this box and want to collect a check. So I've been heavily working on the social equity program through the city of LA since 2016, when we started legalizing in the state of California. And that wasn't my intent. My intent was not to leave out the people that have been working in the industry for so many years. However, I do think that my community deserves reparations. My community deserves to heal. And healing has many definitions depending on who you're speaking to, right? There's still people in jail that I grew up with for doing the things that I'm doing now legally, right? So what about them? Then people are released from prison and there is no reentry programs into society that allows them to have a livable wage, to have day-to-day activities within our community. There's children, there's still gang violence. I mean, even thinking about the current issues that Lori explained on a government level that are affecting the our communities, from homelessness to dropout rates. California is a fruitful state. Los Angeles is a fruitful city. We make money, we produce revenue. However, that revenue is not invested into our communities properly. And I think that as quickly as we want to move through this process to get licenses and to get operating, it didn't take us 2 years to get through this drug war. It's generations. So it's going to take us generations to undo the hurt that has driven these communities. And I think it starts with having those honest conversations, being politically active as a community member. You need to know who is representing you at city council, what are they advocating for, and what are current tax dollars being used for in communities already. Then you throw in massive promises of generational wealth through the cannabis industry. Well, let's streamline those processes now.
That was great. Anything else to add, or shall we move to the next?
I was just going to say, we did have the opportunity to announce the $10 million for equity funds that went to 10 local jurisdictions across the state last month. So that was a big step for California. The Bureau was happy to finally get it out because everybody was anxiously awaiting for it to get out. And I think what we're looking forward to, because the governor did commit to just under 30 million next fiscal year also, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity for other jurisdiction. I think what was going to be valuable for us is to see how these jurisdictions are utilizing that money, looking at seeing what's working and what's not, because it's like anything in the grant applications. I mean, there's a variety of methods that the local jurisdictions are going to use to determine who gets the money, and I think it'll be upon the Bureau to really look at how they're spending the money, how it's working, so we make better informed decisions on future equity programs. And I think especially seeing what's working, and then hopefully encouraging not only other jurisdictions to have cannabis regulations, but to establish local equity programs in their own jurisdiction. We already, saw that from the beginning of this year to when we announced the final awardees. We had a lot more jurisdictions interested in setting up programs, and so I'm really anxious to. I really think California is leading the charge. I don't know that we know everything we need to know, and I think I totally agree with you. It's not just it's about the communities and that reinvestment, but I think this is a really good thing for California to show the rest of the nation what we're doing surrounding that. Because when I go to some of these state conferences, they weren't even Washington, they weren't thinking about social equity this early on. They're thinking about it now because California is doing, and I think that is a good thing.
Well, we're trailblazing. And this actually leads to my next question is, a lot of people are looking to California. A lot of European nations are looking to California of how we're regulating. Jasmine, you're working in Mexico. Canada definitely is looking into California. They're investing a lot into California. And so when you think about, right now, cannabis is still federally illegal. This is always the fun thing. I'm like, wait, it's not fun. It's the one thing of realization, we're dealing with something that's still federally illegal. And with the vape crisis and with all of this transition, I'm curious if you guys could shed in some light, as there's so much spotlight onto our nation, onto our state, of what should the cannabis industry as a whole, what type of leadership should we be thinking about as the industry in itself? What could we all in this room be thinking about to take away? As as it's still federally illegal, we're going through this vape crisis, which is, a little bit different on each of your angles of how you would deal with that. And then even the polls in Canada, cannabis is ranked one of the lowest industries. It's, it's almost just a little bit above tobacco. It's 19% consumer favor is. So we're dealing with kind of how do we communicate as our industry to people that aren't in this room, that people are unaware of what's going on, that for us to thrive and to really continue to grow and continue our marathon into legalization, full regularization on the federal level, what is it that we all should be thinking about that we're not doing right now? I like to ask questions.
I think considering yourself an advocate of the cannabis industry from the moment you step in, you're in. That's it. Welcome. And you are now an extension of us, right? You're an extension of our struggles, of our education, of our success. So please wear that hat proudly and consider yourself worthy of having that conversation with the next person. And word of mouth, especially in the Latino community, is so important because it's so much easier to have a one-on-one conversation with someone than it is to go and have a full-on panel discussion and be impactful, right? So I think that everyone who is in this room can now go and continue educating, whether it is on a personal level or through your profession. There is definitely enough resources for us to piggyback off of. There's enough information on Google. There's constant articles. Educate, read, and be a voice.
I think for me, it's about being able to evaluate what's working here, what's not working here, and being able to be useful as we see legalization spreading to other states. I think one of the things that was significant out of Illinois going legal, I had the opportunity to talk to their governor's office, and they wanted to know as an applicant, what works for you, what's not working for you, what are your pain points, and be able to share that information, allow them to refine their program further. It's being able to constantly be able to self-evaluate and be able to spread even better opportunity to the next state and to the next person. And to piggyback a little bit off of what Jasmine said, I think that as advocates, and I agree that coming into the space, you do need to be an advocate, but you also have to respect the history, respect the people that came before, respect the people that laid the groundwork, the people that allowed this industry to flourish to begin with, and having that knowledge and information, I think, is really powerful. It allows us to make sure that we're clear on our history before we get on the road.
I would agree with what you both just said about advocacy. Obviously, something that I think is critically important and something that California has actually done fairly well, I think. When we looked at the draft regulations that came out, there was definitely some issues. White labeling, for instance, of brands was in there, a restriction on white labeling, and public comment flooded in about this issue, and it ended up not in the regulations. Mm-hmm. And so having responsive people that are willing to listen to public comment and take public comment is critical. And I think that as we look at other states that are doing this and other countries, that they should also take that from us.
So I think, really what sets us apart is how different we are than the other states and other country. I had the opportunity to go to Canada in September, and I'd heard so many great things about it. And it was great up there, don't get me wrong, but they're having a lot of the same issues we are having and more. I don't think there's a perfect system out there yet. My goal when I started this journey 3 years ago, I wanted to have a model cannabis regulatory system. I don't know if we're there yet on the model, but I think if anybody's going to do it, it is going to be California because of all of you in this room and really being okay. For so long, everybody would say, well, what did you learn from different states? And yeah, we learned a lot of things, but because of our supply chain is a lot more complicated than other states, because we all have different statutes, it's hard to compare. Mm-hmm. But one thing I will say is, when you look at a Colorado, it's the comparison of just the city of LA. On just the scope of how large we are as a state, geographic diversity between north and south. It's pretty incredible that you guys are here in this room, right here, right now, listening to us. And I just think it goes to how California, the perseverance, as I said, it's you guys have persevered, and I know it's been really, really tough. And I think as long as we do that and stay strong, I do think we're going to become a model. And again, I go back to, I heard we over-regulate, with locals and the state. But where maybe we didn't overregulate is maybe with the laboratory testing. We're finding now that with the vape pen crisis, we haven't been finding the contaminated pens are mainly coming from the unlicensed market. So maybe we did get that part right, but maybe there's other areas where, you're right, we probably really, why are you involved in what time we're gonna close or whatnot, right? Let that be a local jurisdiction. So I think now we're better equipped to know what changes we need to make. We just constantly, you're trying to always, and you guys are with your business too, what's coming next? And I feel like we don't know what's around the corner, but I think we're getting better at dealing with what's coming at us. And I really think how we're handling this vape pen issue in California, we're like right on it. And I think we can handle anything that comes to us and be that model.
Yeah. So nobody has a crystal ball. We're heading into a whole new decade in like less than 2 months, which is just crazy, 2020. Where do you see the California cannabis industry in the next 5 years? Whoever wants to start with that one.
What's that, 2020?
So next 5 years we'd be in 2025. Hopefully there's been some federal regulation that's been passed.
Let's hope so.
I guess more
some
from like
banking.
not necessarily like a regulation lens, but I think like where do you see it? Like this is like we're at the we've made some significant strides. Like Lowell's Cafe opened in West Hollywood, the first cannabis cafe. I'm like, legally, how did this even happen? You know, like there's all of these things that we're making history. So what kind of history are we going to be making in the next 5 years? Like what products do you anticipate? Like, this is an open-ended question to end before we go to our Q&A.
It's my hope that we find some stability. You know, this market has been so rapidly changing. It's kind of like we let open the floodgates, and people have been washed away so much that I'm hoping that, you know, we're seeing more businesses with roots. We're seeing a lot of layoffs in the last couple of months. It's been really hard times in this space, and so to be able to have some you know, market stability, some you know, more familiarity with the regulations and the things that are coming down the pipe that allow people to do more forward planning things. That's what I'm hoping. And I'm hoping we're doing that in the face of, you know, federal legalization, so we can sleep a little bit better at night.
I would just add that I think 3 years ago people thought this was going to be a green rush and that we'd all be rich. Obviously, that's not where we are, and I think we're sort of surviving or just hanging on, and I really hope in the next 5 years it does become an industry that is thriving.
I think you're going to have tasting rooms like you do for wineries, right? There's going to be, cannabis tasting rooms, all that sort of things. I think you're going to see more, you know, the intersection between food and cannabis. I think you're going to see probably all that in the next 5 years. What I would love to see is the ability to direct ship to other states, right? I mean, I think that would be so huge. It'd be like for the wine industry, what it is to them to be able to ship directly to other states. And for cannabis to be able to do that in 5 years would be huge, because I think there's nothing better than California cannabis, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I agree with Lori. I think that from the transport side, I'm very excited to cross those lines. Even, you know, right now we're really not allowed to do any massive transportation within the state, and DOT is not really interested in turning that page just yet. But here in 5 years, maybe we do have the first commercial transportation, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's exciting. Well, I would love to open it up. We have some time for the audience if you have any questions. Yes, Susan. Hi.
Yeah, so a couple, and you bring up a good point. I just did the California Medical Association presentation, and they pretty much grilled me on the same thing. So a couple of things. The governor did sign, I think it's AB 34, the Compassionate Use Act, and that it doesn't really bring back collective necessarily, but what it does do is it allows. Right now, the Bureau in their regulations allow retailers to give free cannabis to medical patients, but a lot of that time, they're not. There's no incentive for those above them in the supply chain to provide cannabis. So what it does is, at this point, it allows like a cultivator or manufacturer to designate cannabis at the beginning. So if a cultivator wants to have a certain strain that he's going to designate to a certain patient population, they can, and then they get tax breaks through the supply chain. And then that retailer's allowed to work with organizations to get that free cannabis to, patients that need it. So there is that. We're in the middle of trying to implement that, especially in our track and trace system, so we can identify that going forward, and then we can actually get some data from it. The other thing that we're tasked with doing is that we're required under the MAUCRSA to do a feasibility study on the nonprofit licenses, and that's due on January 1st of 2020. And so we are working with UC Davis, and they're doing a study to see if we should have some kind of nonprofit, what's the feasibility of having a nonprofit license, sort of like what you've discussed. And so look for that to come out. I'm not sure what direction it is yet, because they've interviewed a lot of people. They're gathering a lot of data, economic data, all sorts of things. So we are thinking about it, and so that's something to look for. And I'm just going to say this. I agree with you. I get this a lot. You got bud tenders that aren't really trained, and they're telling people, hey, try this, try that. And if people are having a bad experience because they got bad information from a bud tender, that's not good for the industry at all. And so I'm going to tell you, whatever we can do to help us, because we don't have doctors that work at the Bureau. We're not, how do we establish some kind of training for these bud tenders, or do we even want them giving this advice? Maybe we need to look at do we restrict that? How do we provide them the information they need? I'm not sure what that looked like, but I'd love help with that from anybody that would be willing.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
LA is considering one. Contra Costa County just approved a very broad vape ban on just the technology itself. Anything that comes in a vape is now banned. And obviously it's early days of this, but I'm curious, sort of the state's perspective on local bans of vapes at this point.
Well, I don't know that I can give you the administration's perspective on that. I think it's difficult right now. It's like cannabis regulation. You have a patchwork throughout the state, and now we're going to have a patchwork where areas that are banned and not banned. Even for us to keep up with this is difficult, but I can't even imagine if you're like a licensee and you got to figure out who's doing it and who's not. I think we need to have I would love to see a more, we're taking the state and the locals are having a similar approach. And I think until we have more information, and we are starting to get some information from CDC, and we have a better idea of how we can prevent this, I think you just got jurisdictions that are worried. They're worried about their citizens, and I understand that too. And so again, I'm not sure how to solve that, but hopefully as more data comes in, the cities and counties and the state, we're making really informed decisions on this vaping crisis. But I am going to say I'm really proud of the fact that I think the licensees here have all been to know that we can at least say in our public campaign that here's, if you go to the licensed market, these aren't the people that are getting sick for the
Yeah.
most part. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everyone, we are out of time, so thank you all so much for sharing your expertise, and thank you all for listening, and I wish you the best day, and become leaders if you already are not. You all are. Thank you so much.